Hi, my name is Christopher Stratman. I want to thank you for taking the time to join this video lecture, and we're going to be talking about and thinking about artificial intelligence. There's going to be five different lectures. The first one, we're just going to think about what exactly we mean when we're using this term artificial intelligence. I think a lot of times people get confused. People tend to conflate artificial intelligence with something like human intelligence, and that might be problematic. In the second video lecture, we're going to think about general intelligence. What do we mean by artificial general intelligence? In the third lecture, we're going to consider some of the risks that we should be concerned with, some of the things we should be worried about as it relates to artificial intelligence, general intelligence. In the fourth lecture, we're going to consider generative AI and the future of artificial intelligence. What should we say about that? And then finally, in the fifth lecture, we're going to consider more specifically some of the ethical considerations as it relates to artificial intelligence. So that's sort of the roadmap, what we're going to do in the course of the next five lectures, sort of a romp through this issue of AI. All that said, I want to give you a bit of a disclaimer right at the very beginning. I am a philosopher, and so that's the approach that I'm going to be taking. In fact, I'm a bit of a contrarian or skeptical philosopher as it relates to AI. In the past few years, there's been a lot of research that's been done on this issue, and there's no way that I'm going to be able to cover all of it. Instead, I'm thinking of this mostly as a kind of an introduction. But again, I'm not introducing this issue from the perspective of a scientist or an engineer, but as a philosopher concerned with these issues. I want to think about some of the hype that's surrounding AI and the future of AI. And I want to think about to what extent, if any at all, is AI going to radically change or alter our society? I think that's really kind of an open question, which makes it an ideal candidate for a philosophical discussion. And since I'm approaching this issue as a philosopher would, I think that really, in order to understand what it is we're talking about as it relates to AI, we need to consider the arguments. It's only when you think about the reasons and arguments, both for and against some particular point of view, that you can really take yourself to understand or comprehend what it is you're talking about. And deeply intertwined within these issues are ethical considerations, which I take to be vital. And so we're going to consider those as well. So, with all of that in mind, my primary goal in these lectures is not to offer you my own views on AI. Rather, this is supposed to be a kind of introduction, a romp through some of the main details that we should be considering. My goal is to try to get clear about what exactly it is we're talking about when we're considering AI. What are some of the key issues that we should be concerned with? Right? It's a kind of a romp through these issues and topics rather than me telling you what I personally believe. So let's begin at the beginning. What do we mean by AI? Well, this is typically taken to stand for artificial intelligence. Back about a year or so ago, ChatGPT was developed by OpenAI and released to the public. It was back in November 30th, 2022, so I guess a little more than a year now. And of course, there's lots more that can go into the history of the development of this computer program, this algorithm. I'm not going to get into that right here. But generally speaking, when you hear people in the public talk about AI, that's what they typically mean. They mean artificial intelligence. And in the aftermath of ChatGPT and numerous other AI programs, there's really been an explosion of interest in the public, that is, in artificial intelligence and AI, right? Many people have claimed things like the singularity might have already occurred. And what they mean by that, by the singularity, is that computers are conscious. They have a mind like a human being has a mind, right? So why would they say this? Why would some people believe this? Others claim that even if the singularity has not yet happened, well, it's just a matter of time before it does. Very soon in the near future, AI will be conscious, it will have a mind, intelligence like a human being, like you or me. But none of this is really all that new. The rise of the public's interest in artificial intelligence has been around for quite some time, right? It's been around at least throughout the later half of the 20th century. Take, for example, the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. You can imagine the Tin Man standing in for a kind of an artificial intelligence, a robot type of person, or other kind of humanoid robots in science fiction like the Metropolis or Star Wars, Star Trek, numerous other science fiction that employ this idea. In fact, philosophical discussion of artificial intelligence, at the very least, it dates back to a mathematician by the name of Alan Turing in the 1950s, who published a really important article called Computing Machinery and Intelligence. We're going to spend more time in the second video lecture talking a bit more about Alan Turing. And that's because Turing developed what's known as the Turing test, which is supposed to be a test for intelligence. How would we know when a computer has become conscious or intelligent like a human being? How do we know if a computer program has a mind like you or me? If you want some more information about that, I've offered a link here to an article that gives a little bit more of the history as it relates to Turing and the development of computers. But the main thing that I just want to emphasize at this point is that the notion of AI and artificial intelligence is not new at all. Even though in the marketplace of ideas and the public discourse recently, the term AI has been thrown around quite a bit, nonetheless, it's not a new idea. Just to give you a brief general idea of the way in which this term has been used in mass media and entertainment, think about, for example, the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was released in 1968 by Stanley Kubrick. This was a movie that was all about how artificial intelligence might take over a spaceship and kill everybody on board. Or the movie AI, and even the name itself, it seems to reflect the fact that it's been around in public discourse for quite a while. This movie was released in 2001. It was originally kind of planned out by Kubrick as well, but then eventually it was directed and released by Steven Spielberg. Or another more recent series of movies, a movie like Her. It's a really interesting movie that came out in 2013 by Spike Jonze. In this movie, a man who's a little bit lonely falls in love with an AI program. And then, even more recently, in 2014, the movie Ex Machina, released by or directed by Alex Garland, and this movie is supposed to really reflect what exactly is going on with what we'll talk about later is known as the Turing test, right? How would we know when an artificial intelligence is fully intelligent, like you or me, has a mind like you or me? And so clearly, even though this term is being thrown around recently quite a bit, nonetheless, as a general idea, it's been around in public discourse for quite some time. But the way in which people tend to use this term AI, meaning artificial intelligence, is very different from the way that computer scientists or philosophers use this term, right? When a computer scientist or an engineer uses the term artificial intelligence, they are not talking about the same thing that you or I might be talking about when we're referring to a movie like Her or 2001: A Space Odyssey. We're referring to different things, so it's important to get clear about what exactly we mean here. So one might wonder what exactly it is that a computer scientist or an engineer or a philosopher like myself, what is it that we mean when we're using this term AI? Arguably, there's a kind of a disconnect that's going on between the general public and what scientists, engineers, philosophers, and so forth have in mind. And so, what exactly is that? That's what I want to get clear about. Once we get a better idea, get a better grip on what this term refers to, then it's going to become clear. At least I'm going to try to show that AI does not exist. There is no such thing as artificial intelligence, at least not in the way that the general public uses this term. So, what exactly is it that we're talking about? Well, in order to answer that question, we first need to know what human intelligence is. If the general public means something like an artificial intelligence is very similar, if not basically equivalent to human intelligence, well, then we need to know what human intelligence is. What exactly is that? What is human cognition? What is human thought? What is the human mind itself? What are we talking about when we're talking about mental states or mental going ons? What is phenomenal consciousness? What is it to have a conscious experience? If what we mean when we're talking about artificial intelligence is that it's supposed to be something equivalent to human intelligence, then AI does not exist. And that's because the dirty little secret that most people don't tell you is that philosophers and scientists have no idea what the human mind is or what human intelligence is. We don't have a good answer to this very basic question of what is phenomenal consciousness, what is conscious experience, what is human intelligence. We simply don't know. And since we don't know what human intelligence is, then it would be a mistake to say that AI is equivalent to human intelligence. And since there's no general consensus on what intelligence is, generally speaking, what the mind is, what consciousness is, then AI does not exist. It does not exist because we don't know what it is that human intelligence is in the first place. Or, and maybe at the very least, what we should say is that we should have some sort of skeptical approach about what exactly AI refers to. Maybe skepticism about AI should be our default position. And if you want a little bit more information about this, there's a really nice video. I've given you the link here by Angela Collier, who is a physicist. She talks about this in a lot more detail, and I think she does a great job of really making this point that this sort of outlandish sounding claim that I've been making that AI does not exist. So it might seem like I'm, sort of beating a dead horse here, but I just really want to emphasize this point. What we really mean by AI is not a human mind or a human intelligence, but a language learning tool. More specifically, a large language model, an LLM. But what exactly is that? Well, an LLM is essentially a deep learning algorithm. It involves a machine learning or neural network process, which is a kind of computing system that functions very similar to the human brain, but it's not the same thing as the human brain, nor is it the same thing as a human mind. But that might not be very helpful. You might still be wondering, what exactly is an LLM? So let me try to give you a very simple example to explain what I mean here. Suppose you have 5 million different pictures of all sorts of different random things, and you need to select the pictures of cars. There's pictures of coffee cups, of horses, of tables, of baseball bats. There's all kinds of different random pictures, and you need to select the ones of cars. Of course, that's going to take forever. If you're doing it all by yourself, you have way too many pictures to go through. It's going to take way too long. So you could speed up the process and write a computer program or an algorithm that would help you sort through and select the pictures of the cars, right? That's generally speaking, it's a search engine. But what that means is that we need a machine that can learn. We need a machine that can figure out how to do things for itself on its own without the aid of a human being. And it turns out that we have such machines. We have machines that can learn, machine learning programs. So then we can use that kind of machine learning program in order to look for various patterns and features that resemble cars. It can learn how to identify a car, and once it does, it can very quickly sort through all of the different random pictures and select the car pictures and eliminate the non-car pictures. It learns how to tell the difference between cars and non-cars, is a very simple way of putting this. If it works, what we have is a car finding machine learning program. But there's a problem. The problem is that this would seem to indicate it's not really intelligent. It doesn't really have a mind like we have a mind. It's a search engine. It's an algorithm for, finding cars. And it turns out that if we have a data set of 500 million pictures of all sorts of random things, that might include things like trucks or toy cars or a cake that looks like a car but isn't a car, or maybe an ice sculpture that looks like a car. Now, it turns out that we have a problem here. If you or I were responsible for selecting all of the cars, we would probably include things like toy cars, or a cake that looks like a car, or a sculpture that looks like a car. So we would arguably be able to avoid the problem of leaving out things that we should include, right? If you or I were to select all the cars, you would avoid this mistake of leaving out toy cars and such. And this is because you are intelligent, you have a mind, you have the ability to discriminate in this regard. But how can we make sure that the computer program does not make this mistake of excluding things like toy cars or sculptures of cars? We need a way to make sure that it doesn't make this mistake. And one solution then would be simply to give the computer program more data. We just do more to train it, make sure that it does a better job to specify what things should be included and what things should be left out. So, what do I mean by this? Well, let's take, for instance, a situation where we want the machine learning program to recognize and include all of the glass sculptures of cars and include those things, since those, generally speaking, are cars. Now, when it does that, let's say that we test it and it does a good job of selecting all of these glass sculptures of cars, but let's say that it also includes everyday glass cups also. Of course, we don't want it to include glass cups. We just want it to also include the glass sculptures of cars. But because glass cups share many of the same features as a glass sculpture of a car, then it accidentally includes these things as a mistake. So, what this means is that there's a problem with the machine learning program. Sometimes it's not going to include information that it should, and this would be an error by omission. It excludes information that we want it to include. And then sometimes it will include too much information. It will include things that we don't want it to include. That would be a kind of error by lying. It would be telling us something that's not true. Noam Chomsky refers to this as the problem of under-generating and over-generating content or information. And this turns out to be one of the most important and maybe one of the older problems that we have with regard to artificial intelligence, or more specifically, large language models, right? The question is, how much information is enough and how much is too much? This is generally called the frame problem in robotics research. For more information, you can check out this article. I've given you the link here. But there's an even deeper worry that we might consider lurking around the corner for artificial intelligence. It turns out that we have no idea how the machine learning takes place. Right? We don't know what actually is going on when the large language model is actually learning something. We don't understand what it's doing when it teaches itself how to select the car pictures and how to discard the non-car pictures. We feed it more data and we tell it to learn how to do something, but we don't know what it's actually doing. It looks at, patterns and features, but that's about all that we understand. We call this the black box of machine learning because we don't understand what it's doing. Again, I've given you another article here. You can look it up and think about this in more detail. The link is here provided for you. But for now, let's go ahead and move on. Since we have a bit of a better understanding of what machine learning is, we need to think about how this applies to artificial intelligence. AI, for a computer scientist or a philosopher, when we're talking about AI, what we really mean is that it's just a large language model. It's very similar to our car finding machine learning program. That's why it was a very simple sort of example. It's been trained on massive amount of data, a data set of language primarily taken from online human behavior. And its job or its function is to recognize and to generate content. For example, it'll generate things like words and sentences, language, images, auditory, music, all kinds of different things. And it's been, trained how to do this based upon a massive online set of data, information that it gathers. And these LLMs, these language learning modules, are very, very helpful. Something like a ChatGPT 4 is extremely useful. It's useful as a tool. Just like our car finding machine program was useful, but it was not intelligent. So we should not think of these language learning modules like ChatGPT as being intelligent. Those who claim that they are just simply don't understand what it is that we're talking about. Another way in which we can see clear how something like ChatGPT or other LLMs, these kind of artificial intelligence, are not intelligent, is because they're highly prone to all sorts of different errors. Indeed, programs like ChatGPT will straightforwardly lie to you. I've seen it create out of whole cloth, out of thin air, citations that don't exist. They completely make authors up or make up all kinds of different things. And this is because it's not intelligent. It's simply taking information from the internet, all the data online, and it's reconfiguring it into text and words. And sometimes it includes things that don't make any sense at all, or it'll straightforward just lie to you. And that's because, well, they don't even know what they're going to say when you ask it a question. When you ask ChatGPT, some general question, maybe you want to ask it a philosophical question, like, what was Locke's theory about the blank slate, or what was Locke's epistemology? Well, if you ask it some question like that, some general philosophical question, it doesn't know what it's going to say. It doesn't have a complete thought. It doesn't know how it's going to end the sentence when it begins it. LLMs are essentially like parrots. They're just parroting what has already been said by other human beings throughout, many, many years online. Indeed, this is one very clear way in which it's quite easy to spot AI-generated text. It tends to repeat itself or use the same phrase over and over again because it's just pulling information from the internet. Of course, it might get better in the future, but if it gets better in the future, it's not because it's doing something different. It's just better at excluding information that it currently includes, or it's better at excluding things that are false and only including true things. Now, I've been saying that artificial intelligence is very different from human intelligence, insofar as artificial intelligence, AI, isn't intelligent at all. But I do think there is an important way in which artificial intelligence, LLMs, are quite similar to human intelligence. LLMs are notoriously biased. They have been trained on human language, on human behavior, online human behavior. And quite a bit of that is obviously biased and actually quite racist and misogynistic in quite a few ways. Indeed, a friend of mine, a colleague, a philosopher who works at WashU, did a kind of an ad hoc experiment in order to test the biases of something like ChatGPT for grading a student's paper. What she did was she fed it the same student paper, just a single paper by a single student, multiple times, and changed only the student's name, right? And then she asked ChatGPT to grade the paper accordingly. The grades range from a 78 to a 95 out of 100, which is actually really quite bad when you think about it. It's only one paper with only one change, right? This quick little experiment resulted in a discrepancy that's based on a single variable, the student's name, but it generated a very large range of grades. That's terrible. And what this tells us is that the bias is actually baked in the cake. The bias is already there. It's already a part of the data set that the LLM learned, right? The large language model learned based upon biases that already exist online. And it's very, very difficult to create strategies that we could use or employ to correct for this kind of a problem. In fact, if you're familiar with the earlier versions of these sort of algorithms, these AIs, they very quickly engaged in racist tirades, all sorts of different hate speech. Of course, some improvements have been made. They were able to clean up some of these problems. Still, it's very difficult to eliminate all of the problems. Now, I do need to be careful here. You see, the mere fact that artificial intelligence, understood as a kind of maybe a super intelligent computer, or maybe just simply some kind of an intelligence like the intelligence that you or I have, the mere fact that that kind of artificial intelligence does not currently exist does not mean that such a computer program would never exist in the future. It does not exclude the possibility of it one day existing. But we need to distinguish between these large language models and these hypothetical superintelligent computer minds. Let's call the artificial intelligence that resembles either human intelligence, like what you or I might have, or maybe even a super intelligent computer that one day will exist in the future. Let's refer to that as an artificial general intelligence, or AGI, in order to distinguish it from mere LLMs. That will be the discussion of our next lecture.